Good evening and welcome to Torah Studies. And this is Parshas Vayikra. We begin the new book, the third book of the Torah. And the topic we're discussing tonight is about what is true humility when humility isn't healthy and pride is perfect. So when you're truly small, then you're truly big. And that's a discussion what we want to talk about tonight. And before we start, I want to mention that tonight is the first yahrzeit of a great dear friend and uncle, Tzipi's uncle, Rabbi Mordechai Gurari, passed away a year ago. And he was truly a giant of a person, a great Torah scholar. And talking tonight about humility, he was indeed a very humble person. I know some of you knew him. Rabbi Mordechai Gurari came to the Chabad many times on occasions. Small little guy, was small in size, but was big in spirit. And he was always speaking also very greatly, inspiring people. So let this shir be Le'ila Nishmasa in his memory of Rabbi Mordechai ben Mordechai. His father passed away before he was born, back in Yekaterinoslav, they called Dnepropetrovsk. So there should be his neshama, should have an aliyah. And let us very soon be reunited again with the coming of Mashiach. So it is interesting, apropos to what the class that we're talking about. Okay, just 1 second, please. Okay, so when we're talking about pride, humility, sometimes it gets a little confusing. What are we supposed to feel? Is it okay to feel special? Or is it something that we always have to feel inferior to others? What does it mean to be humble? And how is it, can we use to learn from both sides? Indeed, what we're going to discuss tonight is the talking and learning the lessons of two great personalities. We're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, and Adam HaRishon. We'll begin with this week's Torah portion. In this week's Torah portion, we're gonna share. There you go. So, the beginning of the Vayikra, the third book, says Vayikra al Moshe. And he called to Moses. Who called Hashem? God called Moses. And God spoke to him from the tent of the meeting, saying. And as you see here, right here in the photo, and this is an actual photo of a Torah scroll. And here we can see that the Aleph in the first word, Vayikra, and he called. So the Aleph is a tiny Aleph. Is a small Aleph. Why? You know, the Torah, everything is written very, very precisely. Every letter is few places in the Torah. Some letters are written bigger, some letters are written smaller, and there's reasons for everything. So, why is this letter written small? So many commentators talk about it, and many of them talk about that this represents the humility of Moshe Rabbeinu, the humility of Moses, showing how humble he was. And this comes from Rabbi Avraham Saba, Gor Amar. Says perhaps the reason for the small aleph is in line with what I wrote previously, namely, out of his great humility, Moses distanced himself from any sort of prestige. He fled from the stage so much that God had to call out to him. Thus, the aleph of the word Vayikra, and he called, is small. And where do we know it? What was this? We know the famous story. The famous story. Just a moment. Oh. So the famous story of Moshe Rabbeinu, when Hashem asked them to take out the Jewish people from Egypt, and Moshe Rabbeinu is meeting for the first time. He has a godly revelation in Chorev, and Hashem asks him to take out the people, and yet Moshe Rabbeinu refuses. He refuses, and he says he feels himself that he's not worthy. Feels that he's not worthy to be the one to take out the Eden. And he ended up saying, please send someone better. And Hashem indeed ended up sending with his brother, together with Aaron. Aaron should be speaking. So here it says, and now behold, the cry of the children of Israel, God says to Moses, has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression that the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now come, and I will send you to Pharaoh, and take my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moshe said to Hashem, to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should take the children of Israel out of Egypt? He felt himself very humble. So picture this, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, is so humble, even in the time when God himself speaks to him. God himself comes to speak to him. And if it happened to anybody, God is speaking to me, oh, wow, I must be special. I must be great. If God speaks to me, tells me, oh, you go and take the Jews out of Egypt, of course, I would do it right away. Not Moshe. Even after Hashem himself spoke to him, he still felt, I'm not the one. Okay? So, this is obviously a very beautiful lesson, what we learn from this. Yeah. And what is it? Yeah, to be humble. The smaller than average aleph in Vayikra represents Moshe's notable humility. Yeah. Very humble, tiny little office made out of a cardboard, right? Pretty humble. So,
Rabbi
yeah.
Cohen.
Yes.
Just kind of looking at this, this example.
Yeah.
I mean, this could also be kind of a sign, not a sign, but be taken as someone who is does not want to take the job, does not want to take the opportunity. And we know a similar story with was it the Job with the Yonah?
Yes. God also something that, but perhaps that's a little different, but we'll discuss also again more further after the shir. So
Okay.
yes, you're right. It's a nice example also from Yonah. Also, we find humility.
Where
And the question here is, this is a beautiful story and a beautiful lesson. Okay, so we can go home now, right? This is the end of the class. Well, apparently not. No, I have to fill up a whole 45 minutes, right? So there must be something else over here also. There must be something deeper. So we do find, if we're talking about the lesson from humility because of the small aleph, so let's look at a different verse in the Bible. And this is here, we have the verse from the Chronicles, Divrei Yamin. And here it says, Adam, Sheis, and Enosh. And here, in the word Adam, we have the aleph of Adam is a large aleph. So if we follow the logic, what we just explained, the small aleph represents that Moshe Rabbeinu was very tiny, very small, very humble. What do we learn from the big aleph of Adam? Is it something that maybe that is talking about Adam being boastful and haughty? So there's we'll start with an interesting story. The story goes with the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek was the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. And when he was a little boy, there's a long story, his mother passed away. And she passed away because she gave her life up to save the Alter Rebbe's life. It was a whole story, not for today. To give it as a spiritual thing that she allowed her life to be taken, and thereby the Alter Rebbe's life to be saved. And the Alter Rebbe then took him under his wing, and he took care of his education and so on. So when he was a little boy, for the first time coming to the Cheder, coming to the teacher, the Alter Rebbe instructed the teacher, the first thing he should teach him the Vayikra, the book of Vayikra. Start with the third book of the Torah. And the first day he comes home and he asked the Alter Rebbe this question. I learned Vayikra, and it says there's Aleph, a small Aleph. Why is there a small Aleph? So I want to read this story really inside, because the details of the story are also important. It's important to the lesson that we're going to learn. Okay, so what are we to make out of the large aleph of Adam's name? Does Adam teach us to be haughty? So here's the story. The previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, once described at a Pesach Farbringen how the Alter Rebbe brought his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, to school. And when the latter was a small boy, the Alter Rebbe instructed the teacher to begin studying the book of Vayikra. After his first lesson with this teacher, the young boy asked his grandfather, why is the aleph of the word Vayikra small? The Alter Rebbe entered into a spiritual trance for a short while. It says here a short while, but I think it's not a short while. The translation is a little different. It says a hipshet Zeit. In Yiddish, it says hipshet Zeit. Hipshet Zeit means quite a while. For quite a while, the Alter Rebbe was in a trance. He was in a dveikus, thinking about this. And then he said the following. Adam was God's literal handiwork, about whom God testified that he was wiser than the angels. Adam was aware of his own worth, and that eventually got to him, ultimately leading to his downfall with the sin of the tree of the knowledge, the tree of knowledge. And the Alter Rebbe continues and says, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, he too was aware of his own worth, but not only did it not go to his head, the very opposite happened. It caused him to be extremely broken and humble. In Hebrew it says, "Etem gemacht alev nishba v'nitke," and given a shuffle be'enei atzma, humble in his eyes. As you thought that if another Jew, not Amram's son, and the seventh sign from Abraham, would have possessed a soul as lofty as his, and a pedigree like his, that person would have certainly outdone him. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu was thinking to himself. And then the Alter Rebbe continued and told the Tzemach Tzedek, little boychik, Tzemach Tzedek, when God gave the letters at the Mount Sinai, they came in three sizes: small, medium, and large. The Torah is written with medium-sized letters, conveying the message that a person ought to be a Beinani. You join the Tanya classes, you know what is a Beinani, an intermediary person, an intermediate person, meaning a person that is in full control of his action, full control of his thoughts, full control of his speech, but is not in control of his desires. That's a Beinani. Meaning he can have desires, but he controls them. And he continues, this is what a person ought to be, which he or she can achieve by studying Torah. Whereas Adam stumbled into sin. Why? Because of his excessive sense of self-worth. The Aleph of his name appears in a large typeset. Whereas by contrast, Moses achieved the greatest level of humility by focusing on his worthiness. So the Aleph associated with him is small. Focusing on his unworthiness. What does it mean, the unworthiness? It means the unworthiness of being, that it's not because of him. It is a gift that he achieved. So here are some questions. It's a nice, beautiful story from the Alter Rebbe, very moving description how a grandfather teaches a grandchild. But the question is, number one, the Alter Rebbe is approached by his grandson, but it's a Tzemach Tzedek, to explain the small Aleph. Why did he choose to discuss Adam? Simple question. The Tzemach Tzedek asked him a question about Moshe, about the little Aleph in Vayikra. All the Alter Rebbe could have said, it was a small Aleph to teach us that Moshe Rabbeinu was humble. End of story. Why do you have to go back to Adam to say that Adam had a big Aleph because he felt himself, he felt his self-importance, and that? We're not talking about Adam now. And especially when you wanted to say something negative, why are you saying something negative about Adam? In addition, the Tzemach Tzedek was a little boy. He didn't learn by then the where it says about Adam, it's in Chronicles later on in the Bible. Tzemach Tzedek didn't learn about it. And finally, question number 3, why does the Alter Rebbe explain the big Aleph, what it says about Adam? Why do we really have to explain that this is in a negative way, showing that his haughtiness? Maybe a big Aleph represents something big. Wouldn't that make more sense? Wouldn't the fact that says about Adam with a big Aleph teaches that Adam was really, really big? He was, after all, he was handmade by Hashem, handmade by God. So those are the questions. You see, wasn't so simple. So indeed, there's actually commentators that do explain this about Adam in that way. This comes from Rabbi Yitzchak ben Yehuda Halevi, and he says as follows: there is a small aleph in the word Vayikra to teach us that though God personally called him and afforded him all this honor to constantly speak with him, Moses nevertheless was always humble before God and the Jewish people. The aleph of Adam's name is big, to teach us that there was no greater person, either in a physical sense, or he was exceedingly tall, or in the sense of his superior wisdom, which he demonstrated when he gave names to all the animals. So this is when we knew, it says that Adam Arishan, when the angels realized that Adam was really great, when he was able to name the names of the animals, because the names in Hebrew are connected, as we learned later in Tanya. The names are connected with the names are connected with the person or with the object that is called. Just a second. In English, the names don't mean it much. They're very arbitrary. You can pick this is a table, this is a cup. Doesn't mean anything. But in the words in Hebrew of every object is the letters, the Hebrew letters of kos, kaf, vav, samach, is the energy that energizes the cup, and the same thing is with the animals. It's kabbalistically explained. So Adam Rishon knew all this. He was the one to name all of the animals. That was his greatness, because he saw the source of the energy of each creature. So that is a normal, common sense conclusion of why it has a big aleph. So why does the Alter Rebbe give us a negative explanation about this? To make the question even more so, the Alter Rebbe himself, in a different place, explains the exact same thing, that the aleph by Adam is because of his greatness. In this next text, this comes from the Alter Rebbe, from the Likutei Torah. It says in Chronicles, Adam's name is written with a large aleph, a reference to Adam's stature prior to the sin with the tree of knowledge. At that point, he was at an extremely lofty level. Okay? So why would Alter Rebbe choose a disparaging interpretation instead of a positive one when talking to the Tzemach Tzedek? So, to answer this, I want to ask a question. When we're talking about humility, what comes before humility? For a person to have humility, what does he need? Is there something else that he needs before he has humility?
Well, I mean, a true humility will be someone who
Now, what comes before? Not what is humility. I'm asking, what is it? What does he need before humility?
well, some sort of a value of self.
Oh, there you go. Exactly.
Because of a humility without value is another form of ego. Like you just kind of
yes.
Avoidance.
So true. So here, the humility, in order to be humble, humility is not meekness. It is appreciating appreciating who you are, and then understanding what it is that you possess and how do you deal with this. What is it? First of all, appreciating what you have, and then knowing that what you have shouldn't get to you. You should be able to take it and use it in a positive way, and only in a constructive way. So what the Alter Rebbe, what he brings from Adam, when he quotes, as we read the story before, what the Alter Rebbe said to his grandson, and as you remember the story you read, he was meditating for quite a while. I mean, you would think it's a very simple answer to it, especially this answer is given, the commentators talk about it. And yet Alter Rebbe didn't answer right away. He focused, he meditated. It was something, there was a message that he wanted to give to his grandson. Here is the little grandson that he, of course, is destined to be the future leader. And the Alter Rebbe is giving the message to him and to each and every one of us. Learning from Adam, that Adam saw his greatness. It wasn't to disparage Adam. It wasn't to put him down. It was because that is something that we do need to learn from Adam. And yet we need to learn from Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Because number one, in order for you to succeed, you need to know the strength. You need to know who you are. You need to know the abilities that you have. As the Vayikra Rebbe says, we're going to read it in the next text. This comes from the Vayikra Rebbe. It says, everyone should learn how to utilize their own positive qualities. Just as one ought to know his or her own shortcomings, so too, he or she know the positive. Should he or she know the positive qualities they possess? And as the Rebbe explains, every Jew possesses tremendous worth. And as such, any Jew can readily see his or her self-worth. After all, a devout Jew's true value flows from a holy and godly source. And as such, there is no concern that such thoughts of self-worth would ever lead to negative consequences if you do it the right way. If you do it the right way, it will keep you going. Use it the right way. He says, what's more, a person must have this sense of self-worth, so much so that at times it is the only way to overcome the challenges of the mundane and the material reality around us. When a Jew approaches his or her life with a proud and strong stance that flows from holiness akin to a tzaddik, all challenges dissipate. This is what we're learning from Adam's life story. This is important. A healthy sense of self-worth that comes from recognizing the divinity within us. Remember, once was a story, was a young Lubavitcher boy came in the early, maybe 60s and 70s. He went into the Rebbe, a private audience, and he told Rebbe he has a problem. What's the problem? And he says he has a big ego. He's very too proud or too arrogant and so on. And he was and he was standing there. He told the Rebbe the problem, and he was expecting, to have a real rebuke and lesson of how you're supposed to behave. And when the Rebbe looked at him, the Rebbe said to him, "Okay, so show with what to be proud." The Rebbe didn't tell him, "Go put yourself down and humble yourself." The Rebbe told him, "Show what you can be proud with. This is your tendency. Use it out in a proud way, in a good way." The pride that we have. There's another story which also shows a little more this message here. Was once a chassid of, I think, a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, that used to say that his ego saved him a lot, because whenever he was in a situation that the Yetzer Hara came to him, and he was thinking of doing something wrong, he said, "Wait, me? I cannot do it. I am a Jew. I am a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. I am this. I'm such a for me to do something so low, that's not for me." So knowing who you are, knowing who you truly are, what is your roots, this is something that really helps the person to go in the right way. And so this kindness is something what we learn from Adam, says the Alter Rebbe, to learn from Adam that he recognized who he was. He was the handmaid of Hashem. But in the same time, you have to be careful that this shouldn't get to your head. We are the chosen people. What does it mean? That we can go and step on everybody else? Of course not. Hashem gave us the privilege and at the same time the responsibility. He empowered us with a godly neshama, with a soul which is connected with Hashem. And this is something that we are proud of. He gives us the pride, but in the same time, it doesn't get to our head to think that we are special. It is just that something that God gave us, this gift, and we ought to use it out in the right way. Continues the Rebbe. While in a stage of holy pride and being cognizant of our own self-worth, we must be vigilant that our personal egos never get involved. Not only must we be aware of our own shortcomings, we must go to the opposite extreme, a radical sense of humility and selflessness. It is here that we see Moses' tremendous humility, so much so that it serves as the antidote to the sin of the tree of knowledge. According to tradition, the stain of the primeval sin, and we're talking about the sin of the tree, it was removed by Matan Torah, when God gave the Torah. When Moses received the Torah at Mount Sinai, Moses wasn't just a humble person. He was the most humble man on the face of the earth. He would measure himself up against every other person and conclude that if that person would have had my qualities, he or she would have certainly surpassed me. So starting with our self-worth as a baseline, we must take on Moses' humility to prevent getting carried away. There was once, you heard of George Rohr. George Rohr was a big philanthropist and supporting a lot of Chabad houses and campuses. And there was one year that he came to the Rebbe, And he wanted to give the Rebbe some nachas. Everybody comes to the Rebbe complaining, you need a bracha for health, a bracha for this, a bracha for that. And he wanted to give the Rebbe some good news, some nachas, and told the Rebbe that he started a beginner's minyan in Manhattan. And he said they had over, for Rosh Hashanah, and he had over 130 young people, men and women, with no Jewish background. And he also wanted to give the Rebbe nachas that he did this minyan. And the Rebbe told them, like he thought the Rebbe didn't hear what he said. So he repeated and said, we had 130 people that had no background. And the Rebbe told him, go back to them and tell them that they all have a background. They all are children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Something to that extent. And then the Rebbe smiled. And the Rebbe was teaching us, there's no such thing, a Jew with no background. This is what the Alter Rebbe is giving. When the little boy, Tzemach Tzedek, his grandson, is asking him, what is there, the small of the Alter Rebbe tells him, there is Adam, there is Moshe, and we take from each and every one. We have a Adam in us, and we have a Moshe in us. And indeed, the Alter Rebbe himself writes this in the following text about the parts that we have. Each and every Jew possesses a part of Adam and a part of Moshe. Let's see inside. Look, says the Alter Rebbe, there's a pasuk, this is actually from the Talmud. It says, Ve'atem tzoini tzoin marisi odamatem. There's a verse that says, and you, my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, you are Adam. Says the Talmud, you, the Jewish people, are called Adam. So we are connected with the Adam. And the same thing says the Alter Rebbe himself in Lekutei Torah, in the Tanya. Says the Alter Rebbe, every soul that has ever lived on earth was once part of Adam Arishon. Generally speaking, Adam's soul splits into 613 strains, but more specifically, it splits into innumerable sparks, which are the souls of every Jew, from the beginning of time until the end of days. This is something we discussed also in the Tanya recently, about the 613, 600,000. There's 600,000 souls, and these 600,000 souls are roots that have the branches off to another 600,000, and so on and so forth. Kabbalistically, it explains this. So we see over here what it says, that each and every one has a part of Adam. And the same thing the Alter Rebbe says, we have also each and every one has a part of Moshe Rabbeinu. It says every Jewish soul possesses a dimension of Moses, for he was one of the 7 shepherds who transmitted godly energy to the umbrella of the Jewish soul, which is the very reason they are called shepherds. Moses was the ultimate shepherd, called the faithful shepherd in the Zohar. And the Rebbe explains what is the faithful shepherd. The Rebbe explains the faithful shepherd is not only a shepherd that is faithful, meaning that you can trust the shepherd. A faithful shepherd means a shepherd that feeds the people faith. Faith is the food that the shepherd feeds. What does it mean that it feeds? Faith is something that we have. We all have faith, consciously or subconsciously. But sometimes they say, like the famous story with the Ganev, Before he goes in to break the bank, he says, God, please help me. He needs God's help to break the bank. If you believe in God, why are you going to break a bank? Because the belief is not fed into him internally. It's only superficially. Moshe Rabbeinu's job is to feed. He feeds the faith in us. Alter Rebbe says this also in the Tanya, regarding what the Talmud says about Moshe Rabbeinu, but the Torah says, what does God want from you? Not much. All he wants is that you should fear God. The Talmud asks, to fear God is such a simple thing. It's not a simple task to fear God. It's quite a demanding task. And the Talmud answers, yes, for Moses, it's a small thing. And the Alter Rebbe asked the question, what kind of answer is this? For Moses, it's a small thing. But the Torah wasn't given just for Moses. The Torah was given to every Jew. And the Torah says to every Jew, what is God asking for you? Not much, just to fear God. And the answer the Alter Rebbe gives is exactly what we just read. Is that if it is easy for Moses, in a way it is also easy for us. Because Moshe Rabbeinu feeds it in us. We need to reveal it. We need to recognize what we really possess deeply inside. Well, we know what we possess. We possess from Adam HaRishon. We possess from Moses. The ability, the neshama, the connection to God. And in the same time to learn from Moses, not to let it go to our head. To learn to deal and how to deal with the greatness that we have. The greater you are, the more humble you can become. And doing this will certainly guide us and lead us in the right way. And that we should be able to be reunited with Moshe Rabbeinu, with the Melech HaMashiach, and it should happen very soon. Amen. So thank you so much for joining. We can open up the room if anybody wants to discuss questions or comments.